Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Welcome to another episode of our special Denver mini-series, Cannabis After 5 Years of Legalization. It was really amazing to go to Denver. Didn't you think, Alan? It was amazing to see what has gone on in those 5 years.
Oh, totally. I mean, for me, this is my first time in Denver, and actually, I guess my first time. I've been to California since it's been recreationally legal, but I didn't use that to my advantage at the time. So this is the first time that I went out, not for a work trip, where I was able to relax and meet people and kind of experience this side of the culture it is just now becoming mainstream in places like Colorado.
So, but the interesting thing is that it's, in one way, it's such a big so what, right? I mean, like, nothing has changed. Denver looks and feels, well, it's more of a boom town than it was, say, 5 or 6 years ago. But, you would walk down the streets, you're not going to know that all the things that people said that legalization was going to do, unleash havoc, unleash, all these things. It just feels like a normal working city, sort of like having legal alcohol, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and that's kind of like, for me, when I was first introduced to weed and pot and dope and all the things that come with negative connotations. When I would somebody I knew for a long time or respected, and all of a sudden I learned that they smoke a little cannabis, and I was like, well, wait, they're not any different. Now.
Geez, so what?
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's the biggest so what in the world, right?
yeah. This probably actually helped them with their anxiety, or helped them sleep, or helped them with pain relief, or any number of the things that...
Or just to change their consciousness rather quickly and easily and harmlessly.
Yep.
It's all very fascinating and compelling and interesting, and at the same time sort of, what was all that about? What was all that fuss about?
Yep. I mean, I think more people are probably alcoholics than they are, abusing cannabis.
Well, we don't have the stats on that yet, but we do know that alcoholism is a terrible, terrible scourge. I read a stat from the World Health Organization. This is an amazing statistic. 5.9% of all deaths globally are somehow attributable to alcohol.
No kidding.
It's an amazing statistic. Now, I like alcohol, okay? I am not in any way taking this moralistically, and we don't have the stats yet on cannabis, but one thing we do know is that it has never, ever, in 5,000 years of recorded history, killed anyone. So that's quite an interesting comparison, and it sort of puts things in a slightly different perspective. Anyway, go to Denver yourself and tell us, by all means, listeners, tell us what you think. Is it really Sin City, USA, or is it a very nice, handsome city where people are going on with their lives?
God, they go hiking and they go out and they eat well, and then at the end of the night, they just alter their consciousness a little bit. There's so different from, like you said, Sin City. You go to Vegas and people are just messed up all over the place.
Yeah, like it's a sport there. But I have to say, look, one of my favorite products I saw in Denver were these little half-sized joints. They were called lifties. Remember them? They were meant, I love this, they were meant so that you could get on the chairlift, blaze, and by the time you got off the chairlift at the top, the joint would be over. That is a Denver invention, a lifty.
Perfect.
So before we kick in, I have to say that this entire series is being sponsored by a great company there, which is called GoFire. And GoFire, you're going to hear from in a subsequent episode. But I want to tell you what they've created. One of the biggest problems with inhaling cannabis meds is getting a precise dose every time. And anybody who takes them knows this is an issue. Now this GoFire has invented an inhaler and an app that makes dose control as easy as taking a breath. So this device and this app actually brings you clarity, control, and a lot more choice over the medicine you're taking. It's got technology that enables a precise 2.5 milligram meter dose with every inhale. That is a tiny amount of cannabis, by the way, folks, and an amazing that you can control it to that extent. Then there's this tracking app that allows you to keep a record and to really chart the results on your mobile device as you go. It also allows patients to search by ailments, and eventually there's going to be a community ratings that are going to help find products that work for different conditions. So you can download this GoFire app and get started today. But as a special promotion, listeners to this podcast are eligible for a $200 pre-order discount on the GoFire inhaler, the device. So go to gofire.co and use that code. It's BRAVE, BRAVE, for a special $200 discount.
Even though the device itself hasn't come out yet, it's about to be beta tested. You can get the app now, as I understand it. So I know it's in the App Store for iPhones. I actually don't know if it's an Android yet, but
it's coming. Android is coming. Not yet. I think it'll be out in April.
But yeah, so you can either search for it in the App Store or get it yourself at gofire.co.
You can like and follow the Brave New Weed podcast on all the best social media platforms. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Brave New Weed, or on Twitter at Brave New Weed, or Instagram at Brave New Weed.
Our interview today is with Dan Anglin, who's the CEO and founder of CannAmerica and CannAmericaBrands.com. What would you say your first impressions of Dan were, Alan?
Oh, wow. He
rode in on a motorcycle.
Yeah, that's what I was telling you. I was telling you off mic. I'm like, this guy rolls in and he just, I feel like he's that biker. He's got that biker look to him. He's just like, you don't want to cross this guy. But he ended up being like one of the absolute nicest people we met the entire trip. Not that everybody else wasn't super nice, but like you can't.
He was like a big teddy. He was a teddy bear.
Yeah, huge teddy bear, and his wife was with us, who's also part of the company. Like they run it together. They're an amazing husband and wife team.
But he knew everything about edibles, and what also blew my mind is that he knew everything about candy, not just edibles. Right? He could talk to you about flavor and color, and what I loved was knowing why a large gummy is more effective than a small. I should say a large chewy gummy is more effective than a small hard candy.
Yeah, they make it large for a very specific reason.
And we're not going to tell you yet. You have to listen to the podcast to find out. And we're also, as we promised you in the very beginning of this series, we will tell you what flavors men favor versus women. So listen to Dan. He has a lot to say about edibles. He has a lot to say about cannabis rules, regulations, and laws. He has a lot to say about how these laws and regs are affecting veterans and the problems veterans face who do use cannabis. It's a really interesting, wide-ranging interview that took us all by surprise and delighted us.
And if you want to find out more about Dan or CannAmerica brands, you can find them online, CannAmericaBrands.com.
Hi, I'm here with Dan Anglin, who's the CEO of CannAmerica in Colorado. Dan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, you've been described, you're sort of a Colorado legend, at least in certain minds, as one of the original cannabis OGs. Tell me what that means.
Yeah,
please.
I think, there were certainly people who were involved in the industry long before it became a regulated industry. And the history in Colorado is that they made medical a legal system, but they didn't issue licenses and they didn't have a proper regulatory scheme for the medical. So it was really confusing. What's the difference between a caregiver and somebody who's actually involved in a commercial space? So by the time they figured that out, they started to issue licenses in 2009.
Right.
And then they put a hold on it because the city of Denver hadn't created their regulatory scheme, and other big municipalities that were going to allow it hadn't done either. So they began to reissue And my business partner at Edipure, which was the first company I was involved in, that license was 00001. So while I didn't stand in line for that first issue of the license, I was part of the ownership structure of the very first licensed cannabis business in the world.
Country?
Well, it's the country and the
world.
world, because they began to issue these licenses prior to any other state. And while there has been legalized sales in, parts of the Netherlands and other places that are very famous, they didn't issue licenses.
That's right.
So this was the very first time down at the racetrack here in Denver. And those of us who say we're OGs, that's what we're talking about, is people who went to the racetrack, got those licenses, and made that real leap of faith of their freedom.
In California, an OG stands for ocean grown.
Ocean grown here. It's
Yeah.
original gangster.
I
Yeah.
gotcha. So the OG, the original gangster, is now crossing the border a lot because your company is not listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange.
That is correct. In the CSE, the Canadian Stock Exchange, we were listed on October 18th, which was the day before Canada went legal recreationally. So that was very interesting to be there for that moment, because the difference in when Colorado went legally rec and when Canada went legally rec was night and day. Here in Denver, we had a big rally that went from pretty much every square inch of Denver, and everybody was getting high in public and doing all these, events that were just kind of an expression of how grateful people were that this finally happened. And in Canada, they had closed all the stores in Ontario. So I'm in Toronto. There are no stores because they needed a licensing scheme. They didn't know who was black market and who wasn't. And so there was nowhere to go. So it was
Just the stock exchange?
well, this is Toronto in general for cannabis. So the day it went legal, they passed very incredibly consumer-friendly laws, like you can consume cannabis where you can consume tobacco. So you could literally stand outside some big, giant building downtown Toronto and stand in the smoking section and smoke a joint. The problem was I had nowhere I could buy a joint that day, so I didn't get to celebrate. Yeah, and it just was business as usual. And I think honestly, that's the difference between Canada and the United States, is that they're not looking at this as some kind of like massive social change with potential for all the things that they're afraid of. They're just like, okay, this is what we're doing now, and now we need to figure out what the process
That
is.
sort of is the way it is.
It is
it's
the way
one
it
of the
is.
least exciting transitions in a way, which is great, I think.
Yeah, I think
It's called normalization.
It should be called normalization versus legalization, because what we're really saying with legalization is please regulate me.
Yes.
Where what we should say is please decriminalize me and allow me to, build a business or do things on my own for myself and my friends if I want to. But what they've turned this into is a very commercialized, expensive industry to get involved in. Mom and pops are becoming more and more rare, unlike the beginning in Washington and Colorado, where, anybody who wasn't afraid and had a little bit of money to get rent and stuff could actually start this out. And now, you've got real estate costs, but then you've got marijuana real estate costs. So a place that's $350 a square foot is $18 to $25 a square foot if it's zoned for cannabis. So right away, a lot of people are priced out of getting into the industry.
Certainly.
You really need to have the capital or you're not going to make it. And so am I glad we're legalizing? Of course. I'm celebrated every day. But I honestly wish a new approach would happen, which is, one, let's take the reality that adults want to have this product and make medical for children instead, or people who perhaps need something more potent or more often, or, they've got a certain circumstance that requires them to be medical. But I think what policymakers around the world need to do is recognize that medical is a step to recreational. So why go through all of the medical scheme as kind of really, the way things are going now. At the beginning, medical was absolutely real. Now medical is more of it's just a step to get
It is
society
here in Colorado,
ready.
but it isn't elsewhere.
Well, we're in Maryland where it's medical only and
Yes.
it's extremely patient focused.
Yes.
And everything is really strict
Yes.
as far as, the packaging and all of those things. But I think what's happening in Maryland is that society's tired of it being such a medical need to have access, and they want rec, right? And it's right there bordering all of those eastern seaboard states. And
it's gonna happen.
one of those that go rec, what you're going to have is just Maryland citizens going there to get it.
It's going to change.
Yeah, but it needs to change faster. It really does, and it needs to not be like the Farm Bill with hemp. What I'd prefer not to have is the United States government creating a new level of regulation over cannabis, which is exactly what has happened in hemp. Hemp industries have had a lot of freedom and some limitations, right? But now, like 10 minutes after the president signed the Farm Bill, the director of the FDA immediately prohibited food items for human consumption
Yes,
that have
yes,
CBD in them.
yes.
So, they just eliminated like 80% of the CBD business overnight. I don't think anybody intended for that to happen.
But I don't think they know anything.
No, they don't know anything.
I think there needs to be three things, personally. Education before medication, education before legislation, and education before regulation. And here we have a bunch of guys, mostly white guys, who are writing these laws who don't have any experience with the plant or with what's really going on, how people use it.
Well, demographically, it just depends, right? So when you say white guys, it just really depends on what that makeup of that state is, right? I would say the legislature of Maryland is not made up primarily of white men, right? The demographic of Maryland is much more minority focused and mixed. But
You're correct.
What really needs to happen is that the rhetoric needs to change from we'll give somebody some access to let's give Americans access to cannabis so that we can control it and make sure that it's safe. And let's determine what's a medical reason for somebody to be a part of it and let adults
Be adults.
be adults. 100%.
Let adults be adults. How
Right.
about that?
Yeah.
Now, wait. Speaking of adults,
Yes.
you are an American crossing the border in Canada now, probably fairly regularly, right?
Yes.
What's it like being an adult in the cannabis business? Do you wear the shirt you're wearing today?
I go branded.
CannAmerica? You go branded?
I go branded almost everywhere. So here's the
But you get stopped?
here's the rub.
Go on,
This is
let's
what
hear
you
it.
need to understand. If I were a Canadian citizen who was an investor in an American cannabis business and I tried to cross the border into the United States, I would be stopped and banned for life.
Yes.
From entering the
I've
United
read these
States.
stories, yes.
That happened at MJ BizCon this
Yes.
year. Really kind of a travesty because I'm an American citizen who has a cannabis business in 3 states and also the CEO of a publicly traded company out of Vancouver. And I can go branded into Canada, and what I get from their customs agents is welcome to Canada. What's the what's the business? And I tell them what the business is and what I'm doing. They're like, oh, that's very interesting. Have a great time in Canada. Then I come into the United States and I get pulled aside. They check me because I'm as clean as can be because you have to be in order to be licensed in the United States. And after they make sure that I'm clean, I then have a very interesting conversations with customs agents that's talking about how the U.S. needs to get its shit together and just make this legal because they're tired of doing this. But they let me go because I'm a U.S. citizen. I have that right. I don't have that right if I was a Canadian citizen to enter the U.S., but as an American citizen, Canada lets me in. How does that make any sense? And your listeners are probably confused, and it's right.
Well,
by
it's
what I
very
just
confusing,
said.
except
Yeah.
for the fact that Canada is quite a civilized country.
Yeah.
We don't seem to be going in that direction.
No.
I don't think our
right.
listeners are too confused about that.
Right. But what the right is Canada recognizes my right to be in the cannabis business, and the United States doesn't recognize Canadian
right.
citizens' right.
I know.
And it's a shame.
It's insane considering that all publicly traded companies in the United States are listed on the Canadian exchange by default.
It's about to change. I think there's some folks that are talking about listing on the Nasdaq in this quarter.
Really?
Right? Yeah. Unsure if they're listing perhaps intellectual property companies or accessories companies, but brands will begin to be on Nasdaq. And here's the rub. Canadian brands and big companies are on the Nasdaq.
Yeah.
So how does that make any sense? That a Canadian LP, so they call licensed producers. So Canadian LP can be on the Nasdaq, but a brand from Colorado cannot, right? Unless they've gone through the exercise that I've gone through, which is creating an intellectual property company that can then go on to the Canadian exchange, that can then go on to the OTC, that can then go potentially onto the Nasdaq or Germany. It's complicated, takes a lot of lawyers.
It's a lot of lawyers if you're Canadian to come into the United States.
Absolutely. And it takes a lot of lawyers as an American to navigate this industry and be successful in this industry. It's just part of the cost.
Part of the game, yeah, definitely. You said something about being clean coming in. So is it the case that almost everybody in the cannabis business is very clean when they're crossing borders? Are they the cleanest group of people crossing the borders that we know?
So the background checks, the similar type background checks to what people in the licensed cannabis business have to go through is gaming. And what that means is no felonies in if you wanted to own a casino, you have to be very clean, criminal background, credit history, all of these types of things. To get a top secret clearance in the military, if you're a citizen that's working for the military, who are probably furloughed right now because of the government shutdown, right? But those people have to be extremely clean, everything about your background. But we typically compare, the right comparison of the industry to other industries is gaming, because gaming has the same security protocols, the same cash handling protocols, the same background check protocols, the same. So being in the industry is like being a casino owner in the way that the government treats you. You're a criminal. Oh, this says you're clean, but we know you're a criminal, so we're watching you all the time.
Extra scrutiny.
Right. I mean, that's the life. So yes, I'm very clean, and I've been licensed 38 times around the country in various municipalities. I've owned, I was part owner of Edipure, and then I created another brand, and then I partnered up on a dispensary in Blackhawk, and then I've just been licensed multiple times in multiple jurisdictions. So yeah, I'm clean.
You're a vet also, and I want to talk to you about there's a lot of issues about veterans and cannabis. And I mean, it's really sort of crazy. You can still, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, lose all your VA benefits.
Oh, I'll tell you all about it.
Let's hear about it.
Yeah. So I served in the United States Marine Corps from 1988 to 1992. So Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I'm not a combat veteran. I want to make that clear because stolen honor is important, right?
Yep.
So I was a gunsmith and a range safety officer. I taught Marines how to fix and fire their weapons, and I was also a primary marksmanship instructor. So firearms was everything, and I had a secret clearance, not top secret, but secret clearance. So I earned my VA benefits, and I have exercised my VA benefits for purchasing a home. Every home I've ever been in, except this last one, which we bought about 3 years ago. So I was mid-career in this, and I was informed by every VA lender that I could not get my earned benefit because of my business. So while it wasn't a letter from the VA that said, hey, you're in cannabis, we won't give it to you, they just wouldn't process my VA loan. So
Nowhere?
No one.
Different centers?
No one. Right? I mean, there's no one. And then banks won't do it for you if you're an owner of a cannabis industry, right? Standard banks. But I earned that benefit. It's different. It's separate. It was designed, so that veterans could have affordability in housing. And so we ended up having to do a private loan, which was really expensive. Until, I had 2 years of my intellectual property company that wasn't connected, that I could actually get a standard loan. But I still can't get a VA loan. Oh, wow. So on the personal side, I don't exercise my VA medical benefits. But if I did, I probably would be denied them because of how public I am. And that's the real shame here, is that veterans who live in places where they can get a medical card, like Colorado or Maryland or any of the 35 states that have access for this, aren't getting them. And the reason why they're not getting them is because they still want their benefit of being able to see a doctor. They still want their benefit of being able to get surgery or some kind of care, even though perhaps they'd rather be on cannabis than opioids. And by getting a medical card, the concern is that you get put on a list. And everybody who issues these medical cards, every state says, there's no database. listen, this is way too. Everybody's got a database. Facebook's got a database. Everybody's got a database.
We are not a database-free society at all.
I don't care what they say. At some point, it could be revealed. And so what we've got is we've got veterans who have a need for cannabis for whatever reason, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, some kind of just pain management. They don't want to be on opioids anymore. And they're afraid to lose the benefit of maybe their prosthetic. And, you have to get new prosthetics often in your lifetime, and they're very expensive, and that's one of the benefits that the Veterans Administration provides. In fact, most of the prosthetic sciences and advances that happen with veterans, right? Companies work with veterans first. So it's super important. And I think that's the piece that Congress is missing, is that every time they decide not to fix cannabis, they're continuing to deny the group of people that they profess to want to protect the most, veterans.
Vets, yeah.
All of them say they want to protect the veterans, but they continue to deny them access. So yes, you can get it rec, but then you're lying. So a concealed carry weapons permit in the state of Colorado requires a statement of drug use as part of the background check. So does purchasing a firearm for the federal firearm background check. In there, it says, do you use illegal drugs? I can't remember exactly what it is. And so if you're like me, you're not going to lie, because who would believe the federal government that I don't smoke cannabis with how high profile I am in this? And I do. I consume every day. So I just haven't made a firearm purchase because it's not right for me to lie on my application. I shouldn't be in the position
Having to lie.
of having to lie. Veteran or no veteran, just that Second Amendment right, whether you agree with it or not, it exists right now, and I'm prohibited truly
From exercising.
from
Yeah.
exercising it. And so there's a lot of things they're not fixing. They're taking small steps. I'm just tired of taking small steps. I've been in this industry for 9 years, and it feels like we've taken 60 trillion small steps. But we're still not there. So I'd love to see a major push for decriminalization, descheduling, without creating a new federal cannabis regulatory structure, right?
Are you involved with politics? Do you talk to the VA? Are you involved in any of the lobbying efforts that go on, that seem to keep going on, get more small steps?
So that's interesting. My background, I was a lobbyist in the state of Colorado for 10 years for business and firearms, right? So I used to be a bill drafter in Arizona State Senate, and then I moved into legislative services inside the Colorado General Assembly, spent a couple of years working with legislators under the dome, and then moved into a position with the state's Chamber of Commerce representing business issues on healthcare. So my claim to fame as a lobbyist was I helped to implement the small business health exchange from Obamacare from the perspective of the business owners. So Senate Bill 200, I got a Republican sponsor and a Senate Democrat sponsor, and it was a lot of work, heavy lifting. I learned a lot about healthcare, right? And so then shortly after that was accomplished was when cannabis became a primary policy issue in the state of Colorado. And so that's how I got into the industry, is that Edipure was very concerned that they would be banned in the regulatory process after the vote was approved for Amendment 64. Because how this process works for a ballot measure is the people vote on it, and then the legislature has to pass bills to enact it and create regulatory structure, or to dictate, you are now the group that creates the rules and here's the methods that you'll do it. And so I was able to help the industry without being in the industry, and the founder of Edipure immediately recognized this was something his business needed. He was doing so well, and this was a whole arena that he didn't know anything about. And so he just made me a partner. So I became an owner of what was at the time the largest manufacturer of cannabis products in the world overnight. And I never looked back. It was great. If I didn't get that offer, I probably wouldn't have stayed representing cannabis, because I would have lost my gun clients. I would have lost my healthcare clients. I would have lost my business clients. It would have cost me my career. So it worked out really well. And because this was 2013, basically, that I'm now an owner of the company instead of just helping. I really started to understand operational issues in cannabis. I wanted to know what I was talking about when I was at the legislature, because I was flipping my script from protect Second Amendment rights and protect businesses when it comes to cost to this is in our state constitution. It doesn't matter if you like it, you've got to defend it. And it was blowing Republicans' minds because I was a Republican lobbyist. So I basically, to answer your question, stayed at the state level. I had lots of juice. I had a reputation. I had relationships. People trusted me because I had been worked on other issues, and so they trusted my integrity. And so I basically decided to just protect Colorado as it became the model for everything. And that was our goal, was to create the model. So I'm the guy who pushed for child-resistant packaging after the director of the Poison Control Center got on to 9 News and said, hey, these products they were just in heat-sealed plastic bags that were clear. And he's like, kids see these things, they want them, they can get into them. Something's got to be done, either prohibit this product or find a way to package it. So I called him up that night after the news program. I said, what is it you want? How do I get you to stop saying these things on the news? What do you want? He said, we want CRP. I'm like, what is CRP? And so, I mean, child-resistant packaging. Like, I know it all by heart now, right? And because I helped to write it. And I found a sponsor. I said, this is the way we solve this social issue and stop this conversation. So that's what I was doing in Colorado for about 5 years. Hearing the conversation. When Richard Kirk killed his wife and tried to blame nibbling a cookie, right? Shot her in the face. We had... Oh, yeah, you didn't hear about that?
That was that one, sorry.
Okay, so in 2015, Richard Kirk had an argument with his wife and went to his safe and loaded his pistol and shot her in the face while she was on 911. And he blamed eating a cookie. And one of the brands that's still around, an edible cannabis cookie. And they did tests, and his nanograms were almost not even registering. So what the court decided is that this was premeditated murder in the first place. But the court of public opinion never forgot it. This was one of the things that was a problem with edibles. Is look, they make you crazy, and kids
your wife in the face.
Oh my God! It was, and we had young Mr. Thamba who jumped off a balcony in 2014, shortly after recreational started, and he was a 19-year-old, so he shouldn't have had it in the first place. Guy from Wyoming. It's a tragedy that happened, but what it did was it created a conversation about how do we protect people from edibles, which is really the wrong conversation, but it led to policies that stopped all this stuff. And I was involved in that too. So stamping edible products.
Stamping, for those of us who don't live in Colorado,
Sure.
means you're putting the dosage on each piece of a chocolate bar, right? Stamping 10
That's what we
milligrams,
started
10
with.
10 milligrams.
But what was passed, what was enacted was a symbol that said THC with an exclamation point. And in Nevada, it's similar but still different. And, in other places, they're adopting the same thing. And I'm encouraging it because it is a piece of the manufacturing process that can be achieved. And what it does is it solves that concern. So why I left Edipure and started Americana was I wanted to create a pot leaf shaped gummy. We were doing at Edipure Swedish Fish. We were doing Sour Patch Kids. We were doing gummy bears and rainbow belts and raspberry jellies, all of your favorite candies, which is why they sold so well. But it created a policy issue, and it was actually creating a conversation around the world about, are edibles safe? And there was, the moment I decided that this was something important to me was I'm driving down I-25 and I see our products on a billboard and it says, can you spot the pot? And the next morning on the Today Show or Good Morning America or maybe both, they had like 4-year-olds at a table with a plate of our product and a plate of uninfused product. And they were like, which one would you like to eat?
Ouch.
Oh, it was terrible.
Ouch.
Then came the Halloween conversations. Now, no one has ever given out cannabis candy ever, even though they every year warn people about this and they make a case for it. This is exactly where the policy discussion has been up until now that we've got a very pro-cannabis, pro-hemp governor here in the state of Colorado, Jared Polis. I don't anticipate those kind of conversations to have traction anymore. But in other states where they're considering these things, you're hearing arguments that are 8 years old.
Same argument. No, it's the same cycle over and over again. So the way in Colorado is to prohibit gummies that are shaped like candies that children like.
Oh, man, that was a fight, right? Like, literally, so the science, National Confectioners Association.
Let's talk about the science of gummies. Let's transition this.
So the science, and you can find this data, you can buy it, you can become a member, or sometimes you can download older data points. But the National Confectioners Association is made up of all confectioners in the United States, and 8 of these companies are in the top 10 largest companies in the world. Hershey's is one of the largest companies in the world. Mars is one of the largest companies in the world. So these are very well capitalized, very demographic science based. They make decisions on products based on who their target market is. Okay. So this is valid data, and it's not cannabis data. It's just candy.
Data.
So
candy data.
In digging
candy
through
data.
candy, and the candy data is basically separated by chewy, which includes gelatin, and tablets, by chocolates, and other types, mints, right? So I focused, of course, on chewy because that was our primary thing. But I've learned a lot about who likes what candy. I mean, chocolate is primarily women over the age of 32. However, men aren't very far behind at the age of 40. Apparently, your tastes change, and as you get older, men like chocolate more. Chewy candy, the percentage of under 18 that actually eats gummies is 18% of
Tiny.
all. It's extremely tiny.
They don't like gummies?
Men like gummies. Men, that's their favorite category. Second favorite category as they get older than 50 is mints. Men like mints. My grandpa had Werther's.
They all had mints.
Yeah,
You're
they
right.
all had
Yeah,
mints.
so did mine. As a matter of
So
fact.
it's part of your palate, right? And so I'd present this information and be like, everything you're saying in this committee room is all made up. You guys just believe this because you want to believe this, and you think that candy is for children. But here's the data. The data is that it's the high sugar drinks that people under the age of 18 are primarily consumers of. So energy drinks, Red Bull, that type of thing. It's 15 to 18 is actually their demographic. So, the claim was made many times over and over against my company and me personally that I was targeting children. It was never anything about what we were doing that was targeting children. You know why we did Sour Patch Kids? Because people loved them. All right? But I recognized in 2015 that this was never going to stop. And what we had to do was we had to create a proprietary shape so that outside of the packaging, you could tell this was a cannabis product. And my business partner at the time was like, I don't want to make the investment into that. That's expensive. I don't want to retool. So I'm not interested in doing that. And that's when I left at Appear because I was committed to it. He didn't have to go down to the Capitol and explain to this to everybody. I did. And so I was tired of explaining it. I wanted to have different conversations like consumption, consumption clubs. I didn't want to keep talking about candy and shapes and all this stuff. So I think the worst thing we did was ban the fruit shapes. People associate visually flavor profiles by fruit shapes, and that has nothing to do with kids, right? I agree with the Sour Patch Kids. Optically, it's really bad. I agree with the gummy bears. Optically, it's really bad. Science doesn't prove it, but optically it's really bad.
It, yeah.
But the fruit shapes really kind of ruin the ability. What you're seeing primarily in the cannabis space is pucks. You see a circle because they get the mold and they can make the little stamp on it. And then it's flavor profile by color. Often they have to add so much artificial color so that it really looks like grape instead of maybe grape, maybe blue raspberry. And this is something that they've created themselves. And then in Washington, they went completely false direction that color is attractive to children. And what they did is the director, who I was on a panel with in Florida, and that's how I know this, he went to Home Depot and grabbed all the Disney paint palettes. And so he felt if Disney had decided that these colors were colors for kids' rooms, the candy should not be this color. And I was like, are you kidding me? And he says, no, I'm totally not kidding you. I couldn't think of how to do it. They wanted us to prohibit colors that would be attractive to children. This is the only way I could think of it. So this is how this policy is being created on the fly around the world. Home Depot. Disney palettes. Okay, maybe there's something to that, but really? Or is it that Disney has a style guide that they established in the 40s of this yellow and this red is us? And so then they're, but I mean, this is what happens when you add conjecture instead of data, and anecdotal, analysis. Oh, my nephew once went to a party where somebody dosed him with something that he didn't know. Well, that doesn't mean that's what happens every time somebody purchases a product. I've explained to people we've sold over 13 million units in our history as Americana and CannAmerica of gummies, which is like 130 million gummies, right? We've never once had a report of accidental ingestion because they collect this stuff. And believe me, if I was connected to it,
you would know. Yeah.
Smart Colorado would go out there and like make posters of it and a whole half-hour TV show on ABC News. So it's never happened. And I think what we're talking about are microscopic incidences where something that shouldn't have happened, where some parent left something out and their kid got a hold of it. And that's tragic.
I've always thought it was more about bad parenting than bad manufacturing, really.
I just don't see people buying a $30 product to trick
giving
their
it to
buddies.
a kid. I know.
Yeah,
Here, kid, try this.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about, for all my trendy friends in New York, do you make any vegan candies?
That's a very good question. So we are a large-scale, volume-based company. So we are not a boutique, right? So vegan is the only way to get around the construct of what gelatin is to go with pectin. And pectin, unfortunately, is a product that if you've ever had sugar-free candy, it's often pectin. And you're not supposed to eat a lot of it, right? So
because
a sugar-free product will cause you to have irritable bowel syndrome,
stomach upset.
Yes, unpleasant things for the radio. So, and it's a very expensive product, right? We're all competing for price at the wholesale level in the state of Colorado because we're so saturated with businesses. In other markets like Maryland, it probably wouldn't be a thing, but in that competing for shelf space through price, pectin doesn't make sense because it costs me more. And then organic sugar is an extremely expensive ingredient, right? So we're looking at other ways. We're currently using fruit juice in our current lineup, and in our new lineup, we've introduced beet juice as a way to really create a good flavor profile that's healthier. So right now, no. And I'm okay with that because I think that, until we enter the California market where vegans outnumber non-vegans, it's not that important. We're moving enough now to where we're focusing on flavor profiles, right, to really create amazing confections that also have great efficacy. One of the things that we've done for years is genome specificity. And what that means is you take sativa, let's just go sativa. You take a sativa source plant prior to the extraction, and then you track that through all of your extraction, and you don't mix it with other strains. You make sure that it's a sativa base. And then in the distillation process, what you've done is you've stripped out all the compounds except for the THC.
Yeah.
So then you reintroduce the terpenes that you have stripped out in a flavor profile back into that oil so it's genome specific. That was a mouthful.
That is a mouthful.
So,
but I understand it.
So it's been 2 years of struggling to convince consumers that distillate, they all understand distillate. They all get that it's a clean oil. It's not a food-grade oil. It's not just decarb. It's actual post-processed purified.
With no terpenes, with no other cannabinoids.
With no other cannabinoids. But then the concept of reintroducing terpenes has been something that a lot of folks really haven't I guess, understood enough to believe that our process is true. And so we've got, this is a major shift for the company, is we have been doing this for 2.5 years, and we're eliminating it now, because what we don't want is we don't want people to not try our product because they don't believe in our science. And that has really been, the negative response to genome specificity is there's no way it's genome specific if you're doing distillate. And, our response is all oil should be clean oil. All oil should be what you're getting, concentrated THC in its purified form, whether it's THCAs, THCVs. We're going to begin focusing on CBGs as well as nutraceuticals, right, in both the cannabis space and the hemp space. But this has been something that has been in development for over a year. Some people would say, you're crazy. You're selling a lot of sativa sour gummies. And my response is, yes, we are. But as the consumer becomes more educated in the process of this, I don't want people to not believe in our science and not believe in our, and it's too hard to explain it. That sounds lazy, but we've been explaining it for 2.5 years.
No, it's a lot to explain on a very small label.
Yeah.
So last question is, what's everybody's favorite flavor?
Of our current lineup or candy? Because I've got both.
Tell me both.
So lemonade is our favorite in our current lineup, but the top 4 flavors in gummies is cherry, blue raspberry, peach, and strawberry banana. And so these are just the highest performing of the. So there's 6 gummy manufacturers that basically supply the whole world with gummies. It's kind of like bourbon. You guys familiar? There's only actually 2 people that make bourbon. They just put different labels on all of it with different recipes. And so these 6 global, you've heard of them, Haribo, and you've heard of, Trolley, and you're probably familiar with Albanese and some of these other, companies that you see in the airport or Walgreens. Well, but all the stuff that's being sold in CVS, 7-Eleven, Walmart that has their own labels on it, those are made by one of those companies, right? So it's the same thing. Interestingly enough, only 2 companies make all the glasses in the world. I don't know if you knew that.
Warby Parker and everybody else?
No, they're all white labeled, so they're all made in 2 manufacturing facilities.
Why do they cost $500? Would
of
you
the
explain to me why my
brand.
frames cost $500?
Branding, man. Branding.
It's so insane.
The same place that makes the $5 sunglasses switches the production line at 2:00, and they make your $500 glasses.
ones. And Sucker Me pays for it.
Yeah, well,
Dan,
that's branding, right?
Yeah.
Because you have confidence in that brand. And I'm sure the quality of the design and the construction of the $500 glasses is worth it, but this is manufacturing. And so, what we decided to do when we were looking at the science of candy is really focus on what sells outside of cannabis. What are people eating, right? And cherry is also another one. Actually, I think I named cherry, but cherry's the number 1 flavor, and I didn't know that.
You told me lemonade.
No, my number 1 flavor.
I see. Okay.
Cherry is the number 1
flavor.
Yeah, number 1 flavor.
It's my favorite too.
I didn't know that.
I'm so Joe Average.
We didn't have cherry ever. So we're introducing cherry.
Thank you.
And this is part of what we're doing as we grow as a company, is start looking at processes outside of the cannabis industry and outside of the cannabis space and messaging.
But that's what's going to happen. That
Yes.
is the growth of an industry.
It's the only way you can continue to move forward as the condensation, right, of the industry begins. Yeah. And it actually began in 2018, but it's going to really ramp up in 2019. Because you have companies that are worth $1 billion in Canada, and they have buying power for mergers and acquisitions, which is now what I'm doing, right? So, just a week and a half ago, we announced a merger and acquisition of a existing processing facility in the hemp space for CBD products here in Colorado. And we intend as a company to make a big splash in hemp globally. And we're in discussions with people and facilities around the world, right? Because this is now a global product. I've been fighting the fight on the isolated individual state marketplaces and having to try to reinvent the company as I wanted to expand. Hemp's different. So what we need to do now is focus our experience and our expertise with the FDA so that we can get people their food and beverages back, and we can prevent the topical conversation that nobody wants to admit is coming, because if you rub it on your skin, the FDA regulates that too. And they're very, very concerned about what do these compounds do to your skin, even though they've been selling topicals
sort of nice
for
things,
10
I would
years.
say. Yeah, quite nice things.
I mean, consumer safety is important, but at the same time, like, what's the balance between providing people with the products that they're looking for and accessing them to taking like some kind of slow government?
One of the first things that Lester Grinspoon told me, who was one of the first people I interviewed when I started in this writing about cannabis, thinking about it, was that this plant is the largest. It's been subject to the largest safety profiling of any plant, any substance in the world. People have been using it on their skin, in their bodies, ever since recorded history. And I have to say, Lester was right. So a lot of the mishigas is, to me, it's mishigas.
They're finding mummies in China that were buried with cannabis. That's how important it was.
And it didn't kill them, right?
Right. No.
Hey, listen, I want to thank you for your time.
You.
It's really been interesting. I'm so happy to know you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for your thoughts.
Hopefully we didn't wander too far.
We did, and it was great.
If you would like to be the first to know what Brave New Weed is up to, you can join our mailing list. Visit bravenewweed.com and sign up today.
Thanks so much, Dan. Again, that was a fantastic interview. We again, for Patreon supporters, we have special bonus content where Dan's Chief Science Officer, Austin Sims, is going to explain some of the workings behind that ubiquitous and mysterious compound called CBD. So listen into that if you are supporting us on Patreon. And if you're not yet, but interested in that, for as little as $1 a month, you can get access to all of our fantastic bonus content. Before we wrap, I want to just talk a little bit more about GoFire as our sponsor. We actually tried this device. Remember, Alan? We and it worked incredibly well, didn't it?
Oh yeah, it was amazing. And he took the cartridge out, and you could actually see the oil like precisely dripping. How would you describe it? Like
it sort of drips onto I guess it must drip onto a plate. I can't recall exactly, but that's right. When you adjust the dosage with the dial, you can adjust 2.5, 5, 7.5, and the size of the drop of oil actually changes concomitantly. So it's very visually apparent, isn't it, what you're taking?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What really impressed me about it was that you can search by ailment. So like, I need something for anxiety, for example, or I need something to help me sleep. You can literally just search the app and then it'll recommend a strain. And on the reverse of that, you can also, when you put in the cartridge, it reads the cartridge and tells you exactly what the chemicals are that are inside of what you're about to take into your body.
Yeah, so you can actually learn a little as you go. It's a really cool device. And again, anyone who uses inhaled cannabis in small doses, probably for pain or sleep or stress or anxiety, should really look into the GoFire. It's going to be in its beta test. I think it begins in April. So you have a logon code from us. Again, it's BRAVE, BRAVE, and you can find it at GoFire.com if you're interested in exploring this device.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @BraveNewWeed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/BraveNewWeed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.